All right, hello again. So in this video, we're going to go over some more CSS grid stuff. I know there's been a lot of it, huh? So this time we're going to talk about implicit or explicit versus implicit grids. Basically means did you make all the columns and rows or not? And what happens if you have more items than you have spots? So how does that work? We're going to talk a little bit about Subgrid. You may see another video about Subgrid. Subgrid is pretty cool. It lets you align things in nested grids that follow the grid pattern of the parent. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense yet, but maybe it will when I get done. And then the last one is grid template areas, which is a pretty cool way to kind of use sort of ASCII art, or not ASCII art, but it looks like ASCII art. You can kind of make a little map of what you want your layout to be, and then you can be very sort of visual with it when you do the code, and then you can put things where you want them to be. That doesn't make much sense either yet, but it probably will. So I probably gave you a starting file. It's got a lot of stuff in it already, so I'm just gonna have you add a few things here to make this look like we want it to look using this code. So let me get rid of the sidebar here so we get a little more space. Hopefully you guys can see that. So we're starting with explicit versus implicit grids. So let me make this a tiny bit bigger. Make this a tiny bit smaller. I think that's big enough. But so hopefully you've seen before, but you can define a grid with grid template columns and grid template rows, right? So that's called an explicit grid. What happens though if you need more rows or more columns? That's called an implicit grid. So what happens if you have too many items for the grid that you made, for example? So what CSS does, or what the browser does, it automatically creates additional tracks when you don't have enough spots. You can also say how big you want those auto columns and auto rows to be. So that's grid auto rows and grid auto columns. And you can also say which direction you want the auto placement to go, either columns or rows. So we'll see all that. So a little tip, you can use implicit grids for content where you don't know how many items you have. So maybe it's like a listing of products, or it's like a gallery or something. You don't know exactly how many there are, so you don't know how many columns and rows to make. So that's kind of what this is for. And there's also this demo will use grid auto flow, which is like where do you want, which direction do you want things to go? Columns first or rows first? There's also row dense and column dense, which will change the order of elements, but it will kind of fill in gaps. It's kind of like a masonry layout. You may have heard of a masonry layout where it's different sized elements kind of fit themselves together. It's kind of interesting. I'll show you that when we get to that. Okay, so down here we've got 9 items. Look at that. They're all like 1 through 9. So we're gonna make a grid with not enough columns and not enough rows. On purpose. We're doing this on purpose for demonstration purposes only. Okay, so let's go down to, let's see, a line 170 something. Oh, I think I marked it for you guys, like demo styles, and then we're doing implicit and explicit grids, and it says edit this. So we're looking at this style, this class called demo implicit. So we're gonna activate, I'm gonna do some of this like we've done before, just putting in the code. Even though you guys have seen this before, I think, but I'm gonna activate the CSS grid by saying display grid. So that now is in a grid, right? We want to make 3 columns 100 pixels wide. So we're gonna say grid template columns, and we'll use the repeat function, which I hope you've seen before. But if you haven't, it means we're gonna repeat the same thing 3 times, put a comma, and then 100 pixels. So that means we've now got 3 columns that are 100 pixels wide. So right now everything fits because it's already making auto rows for us. And sorry about all I put in comment tags for everything, so it does make it kind of busy, so you have to be careful where you type things, right? But all this green is comments that are trying to explain what's going on. Sometimes it might be better, sometimes it might be worse. So I'm gonna say grid template rows now and make the rows. So we're gonna make 2 rows instead of, right now there's 3 rows. Automatically CSS grid made 3 rows for us, but we're gonna make 2 because we can't count. And we're gonna say repeat 2, comma, and we'll make them 80 pixels high. All right. So now we've got a grid with 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and 2 rows, 1, 2. But there's more than 6 things. 2 times 3 is 6. Check out my second grade math, right? So what happens to the rest? They automatically go in implicit rows, and they're already marked as implicit because that's more than 6, right? So that's pretty neat. So I'm going to go down below that, and I'm going to say, how big do I want my rows and my columns to be? So I'm going to go down here where it says sets the height of any implicitly created rows. So I'm going to say grid auto rows. Sounds like you're buying a car, but you're not. That's auto row, not auto rows. Grid auto rows. And we're going to say 60 pixels. So that means that the rows that the browser makes that we didn't specify here, they're going to be slightly different. So these are 80 because we said 80 here. These are 60 because we said auto. Whatever you have to make, extra rows, they're going to be 60 pixels high. So now I'm going to copy and paste just to live dangerously. I'm going to do grid auto columns. So I'm going to go down here. I think it's about line 180. Grid auto columns. This is going to be how big the columns are that we make. And that one is 200. So those are any automatically created columns. We don't need any extra columns yet because we are going vertical. So that's what we're going to change next. We're going to say grid auto flow. You'll see what it does here. Grid auto flow, and we're going to say column. All right, what happened? So we said grid auto flow column, which means that it's going to start counting this direct. It's going to make columns first, or the order is columns and then rows. What I mean is this is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 9 is out here. I tried to make this scrollable so you guys could see it. So it's making extra columns, right? But it's putting things in columns first and then rows. If I change this to rows, I'm going to show you what happens with that. Now it's doing what it was doing by default. It's going 1, 2, 3 across in rows. Row, row, row. If I put columns, it'll go vertical instead. So let's put it back to column. So now it's in columns. So you can see where it is. Now these are 200 pixels wide also, right? These are the grid auto columns 200 pixels. So these are 200 pixels wide, these. And the originals are what, 100. So they're twice as big. That's better, right? Twice as big is always better. I think that is it for that one. We have the gap in there already, so I already put that in for you, so don't worry about that. There you go. That is implicit and explicit. And it's almost something that you can kind of ignore unless you can't. Meaning that if you have more items than your rows and columns, the browser will try to make them, or will make them for you. But this is just saying, like, what happens if I make it? How big do I want those rows and columns to be, and which direction do I want to go, and stuff like that. All right, good. The next one is Subgrid. So Subgrid is a little bit tricky, but basically it says Subgrid allows grid items to inherit the track sizing of its parent grid, meaning if you have a nested grid, they will line up with the master outside grid. I'm going to try to demonstrate this with this demo. That's what demo is short for demonstrate. Did you guys know that? So Subgrid is newer and may not be supported in all browsers. It's pretty well supported. Used to be you would have fallbacks and things, like, meaning a fallback is when you have code in something that says, well, if this doesn't work, then use this instead. So you could do a CSS grid or subgrid with Flexbox or something. That is something that you might want to do with Subgrid, but you don't have to. It's fairly well supported, but you'll see in a second. So when do you Subgrid? So you can use Subgrid when you have like card layouts, which are, you see them all the time, right? Cards are just little containers with stuff. These are cards. Yeah, kind of. You can have content align across the cards, even if they're in different subgrids. So that's kind of cool. You can align in forms, you can align labels and inputs correctly. You can make complex nested grids and things. And it solves the card height problem where you have different amounts of content and then things get the wrong height, so they're not lining up, but you can use Subgrid to kind of fix that. I think there you'll see another video, you'll see another video about that a little bit later. Okay, so let's try this out. So, oh, by the way, you probably saw this before in a different video, but I have a bunch of sort of demo commented out code here, which has some examples and things. So I'm not going to go through all that. It would take a couple of weeks. So we're not going to do that. A couple of week-long videos are not going to work. Okay, so we've got a grid here with with these elements here, and then this is a separate item. So we're going to go down to, so I already have a display grid on this guy right here. It has 4 columns that are 1 FR. Remember, 1 FR means 1 fraction. So it's basically 1/4. These are all 1/4, right? There is a grid here. And we've got auto rows in there, which we just talked about. There's a gap of 10. That's the space there. So all that's already in there. But now we're going to edit this thing that says demo subgrid parent. Even though I probably shouldn't have had it named that way. It's more the child. This is a child of the master grid, but whatever. You can't have everything perfectly. So we're going to make sure this grid goes all the way across here. So this element here. So I'm going to say, and we saw this in another video, I believe. So we're going to say grid column 1/-1, which means it goes from the first grid line to the last grid line. I think it was kind of already doing that, but we put that in there. Okay, so now we're going to turn on grid for it. So we're going to say display grid like we are going to do normally, right? So that says display grid, which didn't really do anything yet, but I think we will see it here in a second. So we want to do the grid autoflow column again, because we want to do columns. And this won't really make, so now we've got columns. Okay, so now we're starting to see, so here's our grid, right? If I inspect this, remember you can see the grid if I inspect, and then I click on grid here. You can see the lines in the master grid. So this is the first 4 items. This is the second item. It has a grid inside of it, but notice how, this is what I was trying to get to. Notice how I made this one a little bit longer. These items, even they feel like they should be lining up with these guys, but they're not, because this grid inside of here is not seeing this grid. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like overlapping and stuff. So we want this nested grid. This is a grid inside of this red container. We want it to see or respect the master grid out here. I don't know if master grid is the good word to use, but it's kind of what's going on. So we do have a grid inside of a grid at this point because we said display grid. That's the red one. And then the main one is up here. That's this guy, demo subgrid. All right. So how do we get that to the columns in this grid to see the columns in the master grid? All we have to do is go on here and say grid template columns and subgrid. Oh, look what happened. Did you guys see that? It was pretty subtle. But now this nested grid is set to subgrid, which means it's going to look at the master grid, which is the green one here, and it's going to make the grid lines match up with the rest of these. I don't know why this guy is a little shorter, but I'm not going to worry about it. But at least it's not overlapping, right? This longer one is now seeing like this grid line, grid line 3 right here. So the width is the same on these. Oh, this one's a little shorter too. I didn't pay attention to that. Maybe that'll get fixed here in a second. Oh, I forgot the gap. So I'm going to say gap. Maybe that's it. Inherit. Which it didn't. But gap inherit means it's going to take the gap from the parent grid. I think that is it. I'm going to ignore the fact that these are a little bit different size. Oh, I know why they're a different size, because there's a margin on here. So there's space inside of this container, right? This right here. I could probably turn that off, but I'm not going to bother. No. Okay. Let's not worry about it, but you get the idea that these are aligning. with the master grid. I'll look at this after I do the video and go, oh yeah, forgot that. Sometimes things work that way. Okay, so that is Subgrid. I did put a link in here for you guys for Can I Use. Remember, Can I Use is a website that you can use to see if you can use certain features, right? So this is CSS Subgrid. You can see it's green most places. Opera Mini is never green. I don't even think it's made anymore. These are some other browsers that are, they're still around, but they're still not supported. But the major ones are Chrome, Edge, Safari, Firefox, Opera. IE11 does not, but nobody uses that. What is the global usage? 0.68%. Less than 1%. Safari does now. Samsung Internet, Chrome for Android, Opera Mobile, a bunch of stuff. Android does. So it's pretty well supported, but not perfectly. So that is something that you should keep in mind. You could use fallbacks, things like that, but this is changing all the time and getting better all the time. So, all right. Oh, I forgot to show you. I'm going to go back 1 second to the previous one. Remember we said grid auto flow before in the previous demo? I'm just going backwards in time just for a second. So if we say, here's a good demo from MDN. Is it working? Yeah, it is. So if I say grid auto flow row, then it does the rows first. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Grid auto flow column, it does columns first. So now it's vertical through the columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That makes kind of sense. Here's the row dense one that I mentioned, which I never showed you. Look at that. So we say grid auto flow row dense, and it's going to start with rows, but dense means it can rearrange items inside the container to fit better. So it's kind of like playing, is it Jenga? It's like playing a video game that I can't think of. But here you've got 1, 3. Why is 3 second? 1, 3, 2, 4, 5. Why is it that way? Because the browser figured out, well, 3 would fit in here, but 2 doesn't. So let's put 3 there and then 2 there. So it's really out of order of the regular document flow, which you have to be careful of, right? Maybe you can't have it out of order, so that wouldn't work. But for a lot of things, it could. So that's what grid auto flow row dense does. Sorry, I had to go back in time for that one. All right, let's finish up. So we've got grid template areas. Let me refresh this because it's got lines all over it. I'm trying to get that to go away, but it's not going away. Let's get this, do this. All right, there we go. So we've got grid template areas. So this one is pretty interesting. So what you do is you make a little map for the browser to follow to put the different elements where you want them to go. You'll see what I mean when we do this in a second. But it lets you create sort of layouts using meaningful names instead of numbers, and it's almost like a little, like I said, like a little visual map. So you draw your layout using text, and then you assign elements to those named areas. So this is called grid template, and you name the areas. So here's some rules for the grid areas. They must be rectangular. You have to use quotes for each row definition. Use dots for empty cells. There's a few rules here. It'll make more sense when you actually see it. And you can also use, of course, you can use media queries for all these and have these turn on and off and be single column on mobile, which you see a lot, and then do your crazy layout at the end when you get to desktop. So right now we've got, we're going down to grid template areas. It's about line 227, but not exactly, maybe for you, depending on how you typed it. I already have the grid turned on. So there's 5 elements in here. There's a header, navigation, main area, content. That's going to be down here. And a side, which is another column, and the footer. So right now it's all out of whack, and it's just lining up. Those 5 elements are in this grid, right? If I inspect here again and look at the grid itself, so remember this from hopefully from our previous video, you can click on the grid right there and see the grid. So there's 5 elements, but there's 9 cells. So we want to move these around so we get a layout that we want instead of whatever this is. Not really working. So, all right, let me get rid of this again because I don't want all those lines on there. All right, so we've got display grid, which makes a grid. We've got Grid template columns, what does that mean? A little review. That means the first, this is 1, 2, and 1. That means this one's going to be twice as big as these two. So the center column is twice as big. You can see that's twice as big as that. So that's pretty easy. Grid template rows, we've got 3 rows. I only see 2, but we've got 80, 200, and 60. So we've got 80, 200, and then there will be one down here. Right now it's not being used because there's not enough items in there. All right, so here's the tricky part. I'm actually gonna paste this in because I don't want to try to type it and then mess it up and have you guys watch me mess it up and then it takes longer and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm gonna pause real quick. All right, I'm back. I wanted to do that because I didn't want to type it in the middle of all these comment tags because I knew that would get messed up because this is kind of visual code and I didn't really want it to break up with all these comment tags. So what does this mean? This means, if you can see this, this means we want the header to go all the way across the 3 columns. Remember, we have 3 columns, 1, 2, 3. Then we want nav on the left column, main in the middle column, and aside on the right column. So there we go. And then footer, footer, footer means we want footer in the left column, the center column, and the right column, which means it's going to go across 3. So this is going to go across 3. This is going to go across 3. These are each going to go across 1 column. But it hasn't really done anything yet. Why not? Because we didn't tell the browser, like, what's the header part, and what's the nav part, and what's the main, and what's the aside, and what's the footer. So that's what you have to do down on the next part, which is down here where we will type this part. So we've got background colors on these so you can see, but the first area is the header, then we've got the nav, then the main, then the aside. What does this selector mean? Hopefully you know that, but if you don't, we're in the demo areas. This is the demo areas, a class with demo areas, and then we've got area-header. That's this guy right here. So each one of these has a different class. You could use IDs for these. It would also work, but either one works. All right, so let's go down and start assigning these elements to this map, right? So this is header, and this is header. So all we have to do here is go where it says places this element in the header area, spans columns 1 through 3, row 1. What does that mean? Let's just put it in there and we'll see. So I just say grid area, header. And it doesn't have to be called header either, but that makes sense, right? Oh, it worked. Okay, so let's review. I know this gets a little tricky. So all we did just there is we said, hey, we want this element, which has a class of area header. We want to call it, basically we're naming it header. And we set up here that the header is going to go across 1, 2, 3 columns. So it goes across 3 columns. Check that out. That's pretty cool, right? So now you can kind of see, like, well, we just name things that we want to name, and then we make the map up here in the grid template areas section. So this is the map. This is where we're putting whatever goes into each piece of the map on the map. That doesn't make sense. Sorry. All right, so the second one we're going to do is the nav. So we say grid area, and it's going to be grid area every time, so you'll get used to that. And it's just map, I think. Oh, sorry, it's nav, not map. So now the navigation is over here, and that's because we said if we want it in the second row in the first column, it's right there. So hopefully you guys can see that now, how this is kind of a little map. Header, 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 nav, main, aside, footer, 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 right? Header, 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 nav, and we have to do the 3 more and we're done. We just have to assign them. So I'm going to go down to the main and do that. I'm going to say grid area, and then this one is main. And that's a good example of sort of like, you can name these kind of what you want, and then they make sense, right? I'm going to call the main because that makes sense, right? All right, so that's the grid area main. This one is an aside, so same thing again. Grid. And you can do very elaborate layouts this way, right? Because you can put things wherever you want. So we didn't do anything really to this. They were already kind of going in those spots. The last part though, the footer is not. We don't want the footer to be stuck under the nav. We want it to go all the way across, which is what we said here. It's already mapped in there, footer, 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 but we have to tell it which part is the footer. So let's go down to footer. So it's demo areas, area footer. And we're going to put grid area, footer. Boom. Look at that. So we've got header, 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 navigation main aside, footer. And we have ourselves a pretty typical layout right there. So this could be used on a whole page if you wanted to. You know, there's a lot of web pages with a header, a footer, 3 columns in there. There you go. And you can do all kinds of crazy things. You can rearrange things. You can have them overlapping. I think there's another video. It's a little bit older. It has some fallback code in it, but a very elaborate layout you could do this way. And all you have to do is change this cool map thing up here. I think it's cool. You guys probably don't, maybe. But I think that's it for this one. So what did we do? We looked at explicit versus implicit grid cells. We looked at using subgrid to keeping things aligned inside of nested items, nested grids, and we used grid template areas for creating layouts that are named intuitively and you can easily manipulate them and do very elaborate layouts. This is not an elaborate layout, but you can. There is another video for that, I believe, if it's still there. Okay, I think that's it. So hopefully that was a little bit of fun and helped you out a little bit, and I will talk to you again later.